Welcome, everyone, to the fifth webcast in the Voices from Gaia webcast series. My name is Mare Cromwell, and I am so honored to be hosting this series with some exceptionally gifted communicators who are speaking for the dolphins, the whales, Sasquatch, the bees. Tonight we're going to focus on the bees and more from January 17th to March 7th. And as I've mentioned in the earlier webcasts, I work very closely with Mother Gaia, and she specifically requested this interview series to support her beloved animals, trees, humans, and humans also. She wants us to understand these other very conscious and very wise realms here on Earth. So she asked that I do this. So tonight, I am very excited to introduce our guest tonight. I'm going to give a little introduction to her, and then I'm going to pass it over to her. Her name is Jacqueline Freeman, and I first met Jacqueline and her husband Joseph at the Fairy and Human Relations Congress in Washington State, which I highly recommend that all of you explore. It's a very interesting gathering of very gifted people, and the whole premise of it is that the nature spirit realms, there are many other intelligence here on Earth beyond humans, which is what we're bringing forward here with this series. But that particular event, which is held in the last weekend in June around solstice, is just a wonderful event, a very gifted people teaching how to work with the fairies, the nature spirits, even Sasquatch, etc. So that's where I met Jacqueline and Joseph. And they were leading workshops there that really deeply spoke to their tremendous gifts. Jacqueline herself is a biodynamic beekeeper and a farmer. She lives in Washington State also, as we were just talking about those who are listening. She lives near Mount St. Helens, probably in the slopes of Mount St. Helens, that part of Washington State. Her farm is alive with many different animals. She says she has one cow there right now. The numbers have gone down a little as they travel. She has bees there, of course. She got her first bees in 2003 and knew intuitively that she needed to care for bees with more respect and compassion than what she had been taught in the formal beekeeping course that she first attended. She began teaching a bee-centric approach, blending natural beekeeping and bee-driven insights into the nature of bees, encouraging beekeepers to enter into respectful relationships and to passionately fall in love with the bee community and to celebrate a compassionate coexistence with bees and all nature. She has also worked in the Dominican Republic with rural beekeepers, combining sustainable organic practices with historic beekeeping methods. She appears as the gentle swarm rescuer in the movie Queen of the Sun. Sounds amazing. Her articles on honeybees and progressive agriculture appear in national magazines. Jacqueline's book, it's called Song of Increase, Listening to the Wisdom of Honeybees for Kinder Beekeeping and a Better World, describes the bees' intelligent, generous, and exemplary role in nature as models of community. And this book has done so well. It's not only published in English, but it's also in French and soon in Dutch. So without much further ado, I'm going to open this up and welcome Jacqueline.
Thank you, Mary.
And thank you for being a part of this. And I would love if you gave us a little bit more background about your work and how you got into this. It's always so interesting when people tell their own stories.
I did not intend to be a beekeeper. When my husband and I bought this farm about 16 years ago, we're both from small towns in New England, and we moved to Washington State, and we just wanted to live in another small town. I have no farming background to speak of. You know, I certainly grew up in a rural area, but I never did anything like that. And in the first few years, one of my neighbors brought me over a bunch of chickens. She said, you're a farm, you should have chickens. And it was an old farm. We live on a 100-year-old farm. We're the second owners. It's always been organic. It's a lovely, lovely place. And then after that, we ended up getting a cow, not because we had any real reason for a cow. It was actually, I started dreaming about cows, and I would wake up in the morning and say, I had another cow dream. What do you think that's about? And I said, I think the farm wants us to get a cow. So we went out and got a cow.
I love it.
It came to me the same way. A friend of mine called up from down in Portland. She had a neighbor who just bought a house or just sold a house, something like that, and there were bees there in the woods, and the new owners didn't want the bees there anymore. So she said, "You have a farm, you should have bees." And each time I would think, I have a farm, I should have bees. I should have cows and goats and bees and chickens and all these things. And that was how they kind of one a year came. And so at first, when I got the bees, I was really kind of nervous about them. I knew nothing. I knew nothing at all. And I went off to bee school, and I learned really what you'd call conventional beekeeping. And even as I was going through the classes, I was thinking, it was just a weekend class, and I was thinking, there's no way I can treat bees like this. I don't even know anything, but I know this is not the right way to do it. It seemed so disrespectful. It seemed so that so many things were done because it was easier for the beekeeper to do it this way, not that it was good for the bees. And even with my complete lack of knowledge, I could feel that. It's like, this isn't the way that you do this. So I really spent a lot of time sitting by my beehive and saying, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. I don't have any smart ideas, but what I'd like to do is learn more. And I think the only way I can do it is by hanging out with you guys. So I spent hours and hours just sitting next to the beehive. And I had this kind of ongoing prayer that was, I don't know what to do, but I'm willing to do absolutely anything, but you have to show me how. And I said that prayer for 6 years, just next to him. And I would just say, I don't know what to do. And if you tell me, I will do it. And I will do anything.
And this was every day you would go out there?
Oh, every warm day. In the winter, they're kind of in a semi-hibernation, so not in the winter. But yes, I was fascinated by them, and I loved them. And I felt really close to them. I felt like I had a very personal relationship with my bees. And I admit I was not a good beekeeper in the beginning. I lost all my hives for the first few years.
Oh dear. So your volume just went down a little bit. I don't know if you moved your microphone.
Probably put my hands up there. Is that better?
That's a little better. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think I was a particularly great beekeeper because I was making as many mistakes as I was doing good things. And that was challenging. And actually that's fairly common with new beekeepers, that you lose a lot of hives. When I got to, I finally did have some hives that wintered over. I think my 4th year was the first year, but I still felt like I was doing not enough. And the internet was still young 14 years ago when I started. It was still, there were some groups here and there, but discussion groups really weren't that well developed. And linking together people, there had to be other people like me in the world, but I didn't know where they were. So it was a little tough to get online and even find information. Now you can think of anything and look it up and find it. But at the time, this kind of respectful care of bees was just not on the horizon as far as I was aware. And it really wasn't. There weren't that many books about them. They became sort of a thing a few years ago, and suddenly everyone wanted to become a beekeeper, which I'm not sure is a good thing either. But
well, yeah, I mean, I would say, I'm sure they became a thing because of our concern of them, all the dying off, all the hives, and the use of these chemicals in the agricultural fields.
Yes, and a lot of people want to help the bees, but I think if you don't understand how bees work, having bees is probably not a great idea. So I don't encourage everybody to go out and, it's not like getting a puppy or something. There's a lot to know, and there's a lot of knowledge that's being passed around as how you work with bees that frankly I think is not right. It's not true to the bee's nature. And that's something that is really important to me, is that people understand how bees are, what their very essence of being is.
Well, that's what we really would love to hear from you tonight is the bee-ness of bees. So are you okay if I just start asking you some questions? I know that I would
love it if you'd ask me a lot of questions, and anybody who's on the call can ask me questions too.
Well, actually, we try not to do that just because it could get overwhelming. This is where the Facebook group is, Facebook. Unless we get to a point where, you know, we feel like there's some space for it. But thank you for that invite to everybody. um, let's see here. The first question is, so we seem to be going through some extreme times, dangerously damaging hurricanes, forest fires, floods, and more. And some are calling these times the earth changes. What would the bees like to share about the earth changes? Do they have a sense of this? Are they feeling like there are changes? What from their consciousness is happening?
I think it's helpful to understand at first that the way bees work is they're what they call a unity. All of them are not individualized. They're part of one. And there's an interesting thing about bees from the get-go, which is that a bee on its own can't survive. You know, anything that's born practically, it can survive and is supposed to survive on its own. But a bee is part of a collective. It's part of a unity where they all work as one. So when you, in the very beginning, have a bee is born, it turns around and as soon as it's born out of its cell, it turns around and becomes a nurse bee, and it cares for the other baby bees in the nursery. And then that bee will graduate through a series of tasks as according to its age. It will become a part of the custodial staff. It will become part of the crew that's when the foraging bees are outside and they're bringing in the nectars and the pollens, they'll go collect it and bring it down and store it. So they become kitchen workers. And oh my God, they build the comb, they clean the environment, they provide water to anyone who needs it, they generate their heat. And each one of those tasks is very individual. When I think probably everybody has seen honeycomb, you know, long sheets of wax, and there's little hexagonal cells in it that they store their food and their pollen, and the baby cells, the little eggs are laid into it. That's actually the bones of a hive. That's the internal structure of a being. So a bee on its own is one tiny little, you know, I could pick up a bee and hold it on my finger, but a bee can't live separate from the entire unity, which is a fabulous lesson for us. If anything in the hive...
If I may just interrupt for a second then. So with your communications with the hives that you worked with and bees wherever you've been in Dominican Republic, etc., did you ever feel like you were communicating just with one bee, or that's just not possible because it's a unity consciousness?
And that's a great question, because people often ask me, oh, I have a hive of bees, can you come talk to my bees? And it's not really like that. It's more that there's a wholeness to the bee community. And that's who I speak with when I speak. And
so within this wholeness, then I guess you call it the overarching bee consciousness. I know, like with
the overlighting being.
The overlighting being. Do they have a sense of earth changes?
Not so much. And actually, I think it's because they live in multiple dimensions at the same time. So,
please share more.
Well, they're masters of creativity, and everything from creating a structure that they live in that becomes actually organs of their own body. You know, a hive breathes, and it's the lungs of the hive that breathes, not so much the individual bee. Of course, they breathe too, but every function takes part like that. But they also exist on multiple dimensions. And let me see, I can probably...
Do you know how many dimensions they live on?
No, I don't. It was interesting though. A few years ago, I read an article about quantum physics, and I was just reading something. And I found it because I was on the internet and I was looking up something about bees, and there was an article written about quantum physics. And a woman who was a physicist, was actually trying to, boy, I'm a little out of my realm here, so bear with me, trying to describe, you know, string theory is one of the theories of the universes, and all different kinds of theories about how the universe works. And she was describing how bees, curiously, appeared to have an understanding of one of those dimensions of reality, whereas people didn't. Now, I'm talking about past my knowledge base, but I did put a quote about that in my book, so that someone could go and read it on their own and not have me explain it.
I would love to know how they knew that. The bees had that understanding.
Her father was a beekeeper and a physicist, and she was doing something called, I think it's called flag theory. Again, I'm out of my realm. And then she remembered when she was trying to illustrate it that the bees did something like this. And then when she went back and looked at it, she went, my God, they're doing this theory. They're exemplifying this theory, and we didn't even know they had a brain. So kind of amazing.
Yeah. So getting back to this,
So I'm not quite answering your question.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Because your question doesn't really, of course, they want a clean environment. They want food that doesn't have poison on it and things like that. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of fear in them about it. It's more like they would like this, but I don't get a sense of, like, we humans can get pretty fearful about our situation because it seems like dangerous to us.
Yeah.
But I don't pick that up from them.
Do you have a sense from them, though, about, there are a lot of people talking about the ascension and the shifting energies on the planet. Is that something that you've received any? They're not even, because I would think they would be aware of it or notice it, or maybe, I don't think it's just a human construct. I know there are.
Most of my communication with them isn't really through me asking them questions, because that seems like the kind of thing I would ask a pretty reasonable question about. But they often speak to me in terms of what I need to know.
Okay.
And I find that kind of interesting. For example, one time in the hive, you have a queen bee, you have the drones that are the boy bees, that, and then you have the worker bees. The worker bees are the females who do all the rest of the hive tasks. And one of my friends, Mikhail Thiele, said, I find it difficult to believe that bees would call the females workers. It just seems so derogatory. And he said, what do you think? Have they ever mentioned anything about that to you? And I said, oh, that's a great question. And whereas I rarely ask questions, this particular time I went in and said, so what do you call the female bees? Do you call them like humans do, the workers, because they do all the tasks, or do they have a different name? And they didn't appear to answer me at all. Instead, they explained to me how sound works, which was very interesting, how sound works and how it affects us internally and affects our thoughts and affects our healing abilities. They went on in that. The next day, I went in and I said, well, maybe they didn't notice my question. I'll ask again, what do you call the female bees? And this time they explained to me something rather interesting about how, what was it? Something about, no, I've forgotten what they told me the second day. And then the third day I thought, I'm not going to ask. I asked them twice. They didn't answer. Obviously there's other stuff they want to tell me. And the third day they explained it to me. They said, they needed to explain to me first how sound works so I could understand their answer. And what they said is, in the hive, the bees, when they're born, they stay in the hive for the first 16 days of their life. They're a house bee. And then finally they graduate to foraging and going out into the world and collecting the pollens and nectars and laying down the grids that protect the earth and doing all the big tasks that they have to do. And so there's this energetic of being within, and then one day, they go out like that. And they said, the name that we call the maidens is what I call them now. The name that we call the female bees, is a sound that's the reverse of the sound of Om. And then they told me humans need the sound of Om because what we do is we're out here all the time. From the minute we're born, we're out here. And it's really hard for us to go internal and to connect with ourselves and with deeper states. And so our Om is just this big And then we bring it into ourselves where we find that moment of quiet and peace and awareness. With them, it's exactly the opposite. It's an om sound in reverse, because they go from the internal where they're already at one, and then they take that out into the world.
I wonder what kind of sound that would be. What would be the reverse of om?
I've made it a few times.
Mo.
Like a wah.
That's so, I love it. You know, so you just said something that was pretty powerful. The grids that protect the earth, when they fly out, some of the work they do are setting up grids to protect the earth.
Yes, every hive is a center of a protected area that each hive takes care of. Let me read you what they said about that. Some of these things are much easier to hear in their words. I mean, I may have written this down for them, but that doesn't mean I know everything about it. So what they do is, here it is. There's this saying, this old farmer saying that says, whenever there's a birth, death, or a marriage, one must go and tell the bees. And I love that task. And really it's, if you get married and you bring someone home, then you must introduce that person to the beehive. And if there's a birth or a death, let the bees know about it. And I had an interesting thing happen with that. We had a weekend coming up where we had a lot going on. We were making some hugelkultur beds, where these are long beds, 100 feet long. You dig a 3-foot ditch, you fill it in. We put 7 cords of wood in there, and then you mound it up and you plant your fruit trees into it. And as the wood degrades in that big pit, and you planted this fruit tree on top of it, it's like an eternal compost pile. It'll take 20 years for it to all degrade. And it's providing all this nourishment for the trees at the same time over that next 2 decades. Anyway, we had a whole lot of people coming in, and we were doing a lot of earth moving. Probably had 15 people helping that day. The next day, we were doing a farm tour for Washington Tilth. We had probably about 35 people on the farm, and we took them all over, and we showed them our animals and our pastures and our gardens and our greenhouses and our compost piles, and lots of activity. And I got this message that the bees said, on Monday, do nothing. Just go take a day of rest. You and Joseph, do nothing. And they said there was so much activity on the land, the earth moving and all the people, that they actually needed to go repair some of the protective grid that's laid over this farm.
Uh-huh.
And I just love that. So I'm going to read you what they said about it.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
And this happens everywhere you have bees. So if you have bees anywhere in your neighborhood, this protective grid is happening. When the sun comes in through our wings and pours prismatic colors all around, we experience the transformative power of light. The paths we fly above the earth create a cartography of flight lines, which with each hive an anchoring point. The lines from each hive go out and come back, out and back, each hive a center point of the lines. Each neighborhood is covered by lines that weave over and through the entire area. These flight lines provide a protective web over the earth. We jubilantly fly around the hive and take great delight coming back to the hive with our gift. Inside the hive, we are storing the light. Every time we fly, purpose is laid upon the air. Our journeys are not merely ways to get from one place to another. Our paths in the ether enliven the air, making communications between the earth and the heavens more fluent. Our flight paths exist within the air far beyond the time we fly them. These flight paths are like the bars upon which songs are sung. They are the underlying structure of the earth-heaven songs. So they're talking about them being like telegraph wires, where communication flows very, very freely along them. The elementals, the planetary influences, the guiding matrix, all have access and communication flows. It isn't just information, because that can be shared many ways. Our paths create a convocation of spiritually adept runways upon which knowledge can be shared. Our paths are greased rails and as such are already blessed avenues for the intermingling of knowledge. The paths too are protected as vectors. The more they are used, the more powerful they become. As bees lay new paths and revisit old ones, they connect the places where plants thrive. Visits from bees nourish the spiritual qualities present in the plants, exchanging communication among spirit beings who live within and around the plants. So now it goes into talking about how people are involved in this. When we build our protective grid over the land, we also incorporate the heart space energy of those who live upon that land. These protective grids overlap and entwine with other grids, energetically connecting and reinforcing our prayer for the land. We acknowledge the presence of humans on the land, and each too is woven into the fabric as an anchor point. A human with a force of will oriented toward bringing out the goodness of the land and all who dwell there is an adjunct of support to the work of the bees. A person who listens to the land, who observes and considers forward motion, who provides the needed and requested materials and labor for the development of the land, is known as reliable and is woven into the grid. In such a way, we recognize and incorporate life-enhancing and life-enlivening poles of being that come from industrious and vivacious adults, children, and central animals who contribute to the land's development and progression. These poles of being anchor and stabilize the grid. Thus, it is important when any being in the grid leaves or a new being arrives that one goes and tells the bees. While we do on our own notice and accommodate changes, telling the bees provides us with needed information to make timely adjustments in the grid. Our work as protectors of the land is respected when any major changes on the land are communicated to us. As sometimes earth changes, and this is the last part, as sometimes earth changes may alter source points of earth energies that we then undertake to repair and strengthen. Telling us of these changes brings us into deeper and more communicative partnership. This act both encourages and tempers the human will, so our wills align with the good of the land, our shared home. Isn't that lovely?
That's amazing. Wow, that brings up a lot of questions for me. So the earth changes that they're referring to, they can
Very physical.
Be like earthquakes, volcanoes, phenomena like that. It really makes me deeply wonder about the people
even us digging a ditch.
Oh, that's an earth change. Yeah. Well, so gosh, all these questions come up from that. So those people who move bees around to different orchards on a commercial basis.
Big no. Yeah, because bees have the ability they live in one place. And of course they expand as more swarms come out, they expand the areas, but they get to know a certain area. And this unity consciousness that they have is very interesting, because not just this bee right now is part of the unity of a hive that's existing today, but those bees will die. Bees only live about 6 weeks. The queen can live a few years. But in a hive, let's say you have a hive in your backyard, year to year, aside from a queen, nobody transfers over, and yet the knowledge continues. That's what I find so fascinating about it. So in the springtime, the bees that collected the pollen from the dandelions last year are not the same bees. It's a whole different set of bees, and yet the knowledge conveys with the life of the hive. That's pretty powerful.
So it makes me wonder if there is an energetic line, which is what you were just saying. They're saying there is an energetic line that they put out every time they fly, wherever they fly. It's like weaving in an interdimensional way, kind of lines of a grid. It's a grid of communication. And does this mean that the grid is still intact the next year when the new bees that were just born are going out for the first time? They follow that same track?
Yeah, isn't that amazing? The knowledge continues. There's a really good illustration of this. When the bees are building that comb that's inside the hive, the long, flat layers of comb. Oh gosh, I should have brought one up here. I could have shown you. But anyway, it's
Okay.
parallel layers of comb. I think most people have probably seen at least pictures of it. When they do this, I put a bar inside of the hive. So it'll be just, a series of bars, and they build their combs down in front of that. When the bees start to build this, first of all, you see a whole bunch of bees right at the top of this bar, and it doesn't have a frame around it. It's just free comb, the way the bees build in the wild. I very much raise my bees that way and care for them that way, as close as we can get to wildness. Anyway, there's a bar up there, and the bees will be all scattered along the top, and they're measuring a distance, and then they start holding on to each other's arms and latching one bee, a whole row of bees across, and the next row of bees across. And they're all like their arms and their legs out, holding on to each other's. They're actually measuring the empty space. And they're conveying that information into the future, which will just be a day or two away. And then they'll start constructing the space. Now, the bee, this way they know how many rows across and how many rows down and how far down to go. But the thing that I find so amazing is the bee that measured this spot right here, this isn't the same bee that comes and builds this. This is 2 different or 100 different bees. So when they lay out this grid where they're all hanging arm to arm and leg to leg and laying this kind of acrobat, looks like Chinese gymnasts.
Right,
when they're
right.
doing that, they're actually setting the template right there in space and saying, this is how this will be built. And then the other bees come in and start to build it. I mean, the analogy I like to use is my husband and I are very compatible. We do things really well together. But if he started building something on one side of a wall and I started on the other, and we met somewhere in the middle, it wouldn't match. And yet this matches perfectly. So you have, let's say you have 100 bees and they're all building a piece and a piece, even from 2 different sides, and it'll come together in the middle, and it exactly meets exactly.
Wow, remarkable.
How do they even do that? I mean, I know how they do it, because they have a singular consciousness.
Right, right. Yeah, so question, getting back to this grid, how broad or how wide, it's just fascinating to me, because I think of one of the things that Mother Gaia has been talking to me about for a while is the energetic grid around the planet. And it's obviously a multi-dimensional, multi-layered grid. But for one hive, how wide is this grid for them? Like, how far out would they go?
Up to maybe 3 miles. Wherever it is that they're going out and finding the plants, that will be their area.
And also getting back to this, introduce everybody new who's on the farm, or any changes on the farm to the hive. There was a story that came out, I don't know, I think it was an old story, and the clipping was circulated on Facebook. But when a beekeeper died, the bees came to the funeral.
Yes.
They flew to the church. I guess they flew to the church. I don't remember the exact details of the story. Do you know anything?
And they all came and they lit on the wherever the funeral was taking place. I think it was actually in a house somewhere. When they'd have in small towns, when you do that, you have the view, and they all came and perched for just 10, 15 minutes, and then lifted up and flew back home.
Wow.
What a connection he must have had for them to.
They must have loved him deeply.
Yes.
They must have really loved him. So bear with me, because I do have these questions that, and you can continue to tell me they have unity consciousness, which is so fascinating and hard for us to understand as humans, because that's so far removed from how most of us think. Do they give you any messages that are broader messages for humans beyond how to take care of them? Or however you want to answer that question. Obviously you have tapped into a very broad and deep intelligence in being able to communicate with your unity consciousness.
That's a yes. The latter part of my book is mostly about how they've designed ways for healing, and those pass on to humans as well. One of the things that they shared with me was about how to create a healing space for people. And that's on my website. There's a recording, and we're going to do it tonight, but frankly, the sound quality isn't good enough on the internet, on Zoom. So if you're going to send out the link, there's actually a
Yeah.
recording right on the website, and it's got the sound. Oh my God, put on a set of headphones and listen to that. It's just the internal sound of a beehive is right, your head, your body is right inside of there. And it's
That's amazing.
transformative. It's incredible to be surrounded by the sound that they make. It's so heart-filling. And what they talk about was 3 different aspects of it. First, you come in prayer. You surround yourself with sound, and they make propolis, which is a healing balm. It's actually their immune system they construct outside of their body. And they said humans can use that too. And so you surround yourself with the scent. And when you're breathing the scent of propolis and you're listening to the sound and you come in prayer, a whole series of wonderful things happens to your body. The scents actually go in and open up your DNA, like they're like keys fitting into locks and putting them back into the right relationships again. I had a friend years ago when I was first learning this who had been bitten by a tropical spider, and she was really badly damaged, had multiple organs that were in and out of functioning, and
Oh dear.
visual disturbances, inability to think clearly. I mean, really, it was a neurological assault on her system, and she was about 4 years in on it. She didn't even think she was going to live through it.
Oh my gosh.
And I shared with her this, actually, we were just looking at how could we help my friend? And I asked the bees about it, and they suggested this process. And she started using it, and it was amazing. She said even the first time she did it, she had physical changes she felt so much better. Her vision started coming back and getting much more accurate instead of how it was. Her organs stopped hurting. Her balance started coming back. So she's continued on with it. She said it made a world of difference, like life or death to
And
her.
so this is something on your website. That's the link that
Yeah.
you gave me. So for everyone who's listening, I will be sending this link out with the email tomorrow with the links to replay this interview, and I'll post it on the Facebook page. That's remarkable. So it's smelling the propolis. I don't know how you say the word, and coming in from a place of prayer, and listening to the beehive audio tape.
Mm-hmm.
Those 3.
Yeah. And you put the 3 together and just meditate in that space. Just you don't even have to do anything. Just be present in that space. Bring yourself in full presence to it, and sit and be healed. It's quite remarkable.
So this actually speaks to the healing properties of sound and the vibrational properties of a beehive and how healing those are. That sound must be, or the mixture of sounds.
When I walk up by there and you can hear the sound, when you start getting close to a hive, you can hear the sound and it just enters me. And we have this joke around the house because I'll say, I'm just going up to the garden. I'm just going to get a few leaves of lettuce. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And I'm back about 45 minutes later. And I feel like barely 3 minutes have gone by because that sound comes into you. Oh my God. And it just feels like I'm part of something. I'm not just me defined by my, the outside of my skin. I become part of something that merges. It's a wonderful thing. And propolis, by the way, since that's part of the healing that they suggest, any of you who are listening, if you know a beekeeper, just ask them for a little piece of propolis. It only has to be pea-sized, and any beekeeper could scrape some of that off of an old piece of comb they've got. They'll know what it is.
Yeah, I don't know where else you would get. Can you buy it otherwise? Can you buy that in a store?
You can buy tinctures of propolis, which don't really have the scent of it. You want to smell it.
Yeah. You need to know a beekeeper. Befriend a beekeeper.
Befriend a beekeeper. Go online on Facebook. There's plenty of beekeepers, and just ask them to stick a little piece in an envelope and mail it to you.
It will be intact when it gets to you.
It's so funny because propolis is a thing that most beekeepers are not interested in the slightest. They want honey, and they have, or maybe wax, but most of them completely ignore the propolis, and it's probably the most valuable component of, I don't know, value is a funny thing to say, but it has the capacity to create healing in a way that few things can.
I wonder how it would impact people with cancer. I'm sure it would be very healing for them too.
Like they said, it enters the DNA like a key going into a lock, and
Fascinating.
and
Very
then the sound
fascinating.
repatterns.
So you and I talked about this before we started the interview, and obviously the bee consciousness is not the same as the human consciousness. And those of you who have been listening in every week have heard the question be asked about hope, which is the question I put out to everybody, all the interviewees. So we're getting some interesting responses from the owl last week, talked about how hope is not something that is within their framework of consciousness. And I believe Mary Jedden talked about it with the whales. But this is a particularly interesting thing to think about with the bees because of how many bees have been dying off and all of the media focus on, you know, losing our capacity to have our crops be grown because we won't have bees to pollinate them. What does your bee overarching consciousness say in response to that? Do they have fears about dying off?
They've never mentioned fear to me about anything. They're not pleased about it, that's for sure. But mostly I think they really tend, from my experience, they tend to look at humans not from the point of view that we see ourselves. You know, we are the dominant factor in the earth.
Well, we think we are.
We think we are. And yet their perception of us is more that, you know, we have a ways to go and we can be helped to go there, but they don't seem to be particularly focused on us. You know, they've certainly given me messages about clean up the environment, and, you know, for bees, it'd be nice to be able to eat food that's not poisoned and things like that. Obviously, those are things that they have concerns about, but they're more involved with a proactive approach. For example, when they lay those grids around the land, there's also another component to it, which is the earth acupuncture points. And when bees mate, this is really interesting. When bees mate, the females go out and the males are already out there. I'm going to give you a little bee background for a minute. When bees go to mate every spring, the boys all leave about 11 o'clock in the morning, the drones, and they head out to this one particular area. There'll be one about every mile or so, maybe a little less, sometimes a little more, but every bee in that entire area knows where this is. And you'll find about 2, 3, 4, even 500 feet up, there'll be hundreds and hundreds of drones just flying in figure eights and circles. And they're waiting for the virgin queens to come and get bred. And when the virgin queens come, they've never flown outside of their hive. They're young. They were just born, you know, scant days before. They come out and they look around and they know right where it is. And they fly straight there. Sometimes they'll take a few maidens with them, but they fly straight there. And when they mate in there, in this, what they call a lumen, that's one of their words. A lumen is a ray of light that comes up out of the earth. And this is where all the mating of the bees takes place. And science even knows this. You know, it's not conjecture. When they mate, the queen flies up at about a bazillion miles an hour, straight up this cone of light, and she flies up to the heavens. The drones will will fly up from underneath and try to catch her. And when they catch, they mate. They insert their penis, and there's an ejaculation, and the drone falls backwards, breaks the penis off. The penis stays in the queen, and he falls to earth, and he's completed his mission. He's made his donation to the beloved queen. About 12 to 20 different drones will do this. The next one will fly and he'll pull that out of her and mate with her, and she'll have 12 to 20, a full belly of sperm by the time she goes home. When she gets back to the hive, she can keep that sperm alive for like up to 5 or 6 or 7 years. I mean, that's boggling. Anyway, in this lumen, her mission is, these drones are catching and mating with her as she's flying up in this light. Her mission is to deliver the progress of the planet to those beyond. So this is about being connected. I don't even know how to say it. Other solar systems, other universes. That's her, at the peak of her flight, she releases that emanation. At the same time, that stimulates that lumen and provides the stimulation. It's like an earth acupuncture point. It is an earth acupuncture point. And it renews the earth for another year.
So it's sending energy down into the earth.
Up and down.
And then up into a multi-dimensional field much higher than the earth, so to speak. But I guess you're not sure who's receiving that information, if they're sending information.
They're sending it out, and it's communicating the status of the earth at this present moment in time.
At that one place?
No, the whole earth.
Oh.
So she's delivering her piece of a message, but multiple queens, remember they have a unity consciousness, are doing this at the same time. So all through spring, millions and millions of queens are being mated and sending their message, stimulating the earth acupuncture point and sending it out to the, I'm not sure where. Again, sometimes I think I'd have to,
well, it's just
my mind understand that.
Yeah.
I feel like,
yeah, well, I know.
I hope I'm not too dumb a messenger, but sometimes I have to go look up stuff on Google and say, what did they mean by that?
Right. Well, I mean, I know there are many spiritual councils of beings that are coordinating the energy on the planet and helping to shift it in some ways. And so it sounds like there's a particular, and I'm just hypothesizing here, there's a particular council that receives that information from the bees, and it gets integrated with reports from other beings around the planet, I'm sure. Yeah. But these lumens, I mean, I guess this is where some really gifted humans can determine where there are spiritually significant earth acupuncture points. I guess there's some real sensitive humans that could probably sense these.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
What a gift that would be.
I've been in 2 of them that I'm aware of, one near me here. And I became aware of it because there were drones falling out of the sky without penises attached to them. So their whole hind end was broken off.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you'd need a good eye to determine that. Or with all your experience with bees, I guess you could tell that their penises were broken off.
The other place I saw them was when I was in Dominican Republic, and I was describing the process of mating with the bees. And one of the very, very rural farmers, the way out in the jungle, told me that he had been up in some of his mango trees picking mangoes one day, and he was finding all these drones with their hind end torn off. And of course he didn't have a clue what it was. And I said, that's your farm is right over one of the earth acupuncture points.
So would you have a sense of, maybe this is getting too far, but maybe not, within a square mile on the land, how many of those earth acupuncture points might exist there?
Not that many. I think, I would say like up to 1 a mile. It depends on I don't know. I'm going to just say I don't know because I don't want to bungle the answer and give you something that I'm not sure about.
No, that's okay.
But
so getting back to the...
Go ahead.
Yeah. But getting back to the bees themselves, one of the things that Mother Gaia told me when I was writing the Great Mother Bible, and this may be kind of far afield, but maybe not, is that, we humans are so concerned about extinction, and rightly we should be. It's not right for us to be devastating all these ecosystems so that certain species go extinct. And one of the things she said, we'll know that it's not that they completely disappear, they're actually moving to a different dimensional field. They were not just in the physical then, and at some point they will return later. And it sounds like, and believe me, I in no way ever want to envision that the bees will be dying off, because they won't. I know they won't. And it sounds like from what you're saying, definitely they don't have any sense of concern about that, even though they would like us to change our ways and have, you know, not put poison on their food, etc. You know, I guess their consciousness is so ancient for one, but also so in tune with the cycles of the planet that, I mean, I have to admit, I'm really caught in my own human constructs right now of thinking of words like trust and fear and hope. And from what you're saying, they don't even go there. That's not even how they think.
No, I've never felt a sense of alarm
dear.
from them.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I've never felt a sense of alarm from them in any way. They have direction, but not fear.
Uh-huh. Can you talk a little bit more about direction then? I mean, I'm fascinated. I'm absolutely fascinated.
A little bit
when
more
you say
about,
they have direction, what do you mean? A direction. You said they have direction.
Yes, and Rudolf Steiner wrote a book on bees back at the turn of the prior century, back in, I think it was the 20s. And one of the things he said from his, and he was very much intuitive and a psychic about all manner of nature. And he said that his perception was, from dealing with the bees, that they were actually two complete evolutions ahead of humans.
Wow.
I loved that. And what he said, and what has correlated with when they've spoken to me about, oh God, quantum physics, which I am not an expert on at all. When they speak about that, he was referencing that their capacity is that they can bring matter out of thought. And we haven't progressed to that evolution yet as humans.
So bringing matter out of thought. So in the construction of the beehive, that is matter out of thought?
I think so. And I confess I don't really know a lot about, you know, I mean, this is when I said I had to go on Google and look up what is a quark, because frankly, I didn't know.
I know, and I don't want to push you too much on quantum physics. Well, okay, so let's shift gears a little then, and talk about some other really interesting insights the bees have shared with you that might be really surprising for us two-legged types.
Oh, let's see. Well, one of the things that is really quite interesting about them, there's a common thing in beekeeping where it's thought that because the females, the maidens, do all of the tasks of the hive, that the males, aside from mating, have no real value. And so a common thing done in conventional beekeeping is that they'll take the comb that has the drone brood on it out of the nursery, and they'll just throw it away, which is alarming to the bees, alarming to them. And the queen will immediately go and lay more drone eggs. She needs to have a certain amount within the hive, despite the beekeepers going, yeah, but they don't contribute anything. They're just eating honey. They live the life of Riley. And, you know, it's very, very disrespectful. The hive obviously knows that they have value, and she'll go and replace them. What the bees explained to me is that the role of the drones is, whereas the maidens are doing all of the tasks, the true tasks of the hive, what the drones do is they have an ancestral role. So this is the thing that informed me about it. There's a curious thing with bees where every queen smells like a specific scent. She smells like her. She's got her own perfume on. and her scent is on every single bee in the hive. They all smell exactly like her. So when these maiden bees go out to forage in the field and they come to bring back their pollen and their nectars, at the front door there'll be some guard bees. And the guard bees will go, "You smell like us, come on in." And they can freely go in and out. The drones will, which only make up about 10% of the hive, the drones fly out and they can go to let me back up for 1 second. If one of the bees from the blue hive went to visit the bees at the red hive guard bees would just kick them out, not let them in. All they're going to come in for is they're going to try and steal their food or something like that. So they really are independent of each other as far as free passageway of who gets to go in and out. You only get to go into that hive if you smell like your queen. However, a drone can go flying over to another hive, stop at the front door, not smell anything like that queen, and the guards will go, "Oh, excuse me," head right in there. And those drones can freely walk in and out of other hives. Now, you've only got really 3 places to go inside of a hive. You can go where the pollen is. The pollen is the baby food. You can go into the part where the honey is, or you can go into the nursery. So if a stranger were to walk into your hive, where's the one area where you would say, no, that's not a place you belong? You would say it's the nursery where all the baby bees are. It's you'd want to protect them. Absolutely the opposite. The drones come in and they're directed right to where the babies are, and they're welcomed. And it doesn't matter what hive they come from, what colony they're a part of. They come in, and what they told me is that these drones, when bees are being born, they make the sound, and they do make a distinctly different sound than maiden bees make. They make this sound that has all of the songs of the ancestral past and the songs of the future. It tells the bee where he's come from and where she's going to. And it's within the hum of the hive that's made by the workers who are doing the maidens who are doing all the tasks, which is the sound of the present. So a baby bee is actually being born into this arc of sound that describes the past and the present and the future. And if they need more drones to be in a hive because there's not enough for some reason, any drones that are in the area will know that and come and be present for the birth of the other bees.
And are the drones giving off the sound then? That's the ancestral sound?
Yes, the ancestral song. And it's kind of like, when I learned this from them, I thought, that's kind of like Aborigine birth. Aboriginal birth is, there's songs that are sung, the birth songs. And that birth song is actually, it tells the past of that tribe, and it tells where they're going in the future. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And Aborigines believe that if you are born and no one is singing the birth song, then you don't know where you came from. And how, if you don't know where you came from, can you know where you're going to go to? And they think that people who are born without the birth song being sung are just at a loss. So this is what the bees are doing. And there's tribes that do that in Africa as well. They have that same belief.
Yeah, I've heard about these songs the song of the child, and they tune into the song of the child when the woman is pregnant. Yeah. But getting back to the bees then, the drones from other hives feel the call on the spiritual or energetic plane to go to another hive where they need more drones.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. So you're saying this, go ahead.
When they're in there too, because they all have a common consciousness, the bees can, through their own drone, see the interior of other hives in the neighborhood as well. So they're privy to this visual knowledge. As that bee is walking around, it's kind of like sending a camera relay back again.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Fascinating beings. They're just amazing. They're incredible.
So do individual hives have their own consciousness, or it's all just one unity conscious of all of them?
I've sometimes felt a small speck of it's not individuation, but that an area might have something going on that is part of a little different than another area, but not so much to be an individual hive. And it's more like the whole consciousness is part of one single unity. And then, geez, I don't even have I don't have a non-dualistic language. So how do I talk about being individuated from the collective at the same time? I don't quite know how to do that.
Interesting.
My language skills aren't up to snuff on that.
Well, there may not even be good English words to describe it. So what messages would the bees be giving us at this time, other than, you know?
I think the biggest one is we need to work as one, that it permeates all the information they've given me about this common work. They share a commonality. They're all working together towards the same thing. None of them would ever do anything, that they don't have that.
Our connection is getting a little bit wonky. Apologies, everybody here.
Is it?
Yeah,
wonky?
they don't. Okay, so just to repeat what you said. Yeah, it's a bit wonky on this end. So you're saying that they would like us to really wake up to the unity consciousness.
Yes, and to treat others as if they're part of ourselves, and to be conscious, to be caring, to be kind, and not be out, I mean, look at how we live as human beings in our culture. We have severe individuation, so much so that we feel like it doesn't matter if I've got enough for me. What does it matter if anybody else has enough? So yeah, that could go and they'd be okay.
Yeah, and that's why, in the beginning when I was asking the question about the sense of rising energies, because there are people who are, teaching about rising from the third to the fourth to the fifth dimension. And the fifth dimension, as I understand it, is about unity consciousness. It's about understanding we are all one, and we're not separate, and trusting our place in that oneness. And I guess if the bees were already existing in another dimensional field, they're already there. They're probably at the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th dimension. So yeah, anything else you'd like to share? We have another few minutes. And just for everyone who's listening, know that Jacqueline did want to do not necessarily a meditation or a journey, because last week we did a shamanic journey with Marike, but she wanted to have us listen to a beehive. And I really wish we could have done it tonight, but the sound from it playing on her computer, going through Zoom, it just didn't work. We tested it out about an hour before we got online here. So so this is why this interview is a little bit different. And we're talking, we're doing question answer. And you know what I might do right now? Does anyone out there want to post a question to ask Jacqueline while we're here live? I'm hoping, Jacqueline, if you have time tomorrow or the next day, to get on the Facebook page and maybe respond to questions there that may come up. But if anyone right now wants to go into the chat box, you can go to the very bottom. I'm making an exception here because we have a few minutes. If you have a specific question that I haven't asked, please feel free to, type it in there, and we'll see what Jacqueline's response might be.
And I want people to know you will get to do that meditation. Just it's on the website rather than coming through Zoom. So that link you send out.
Yeah, and I'll be sending the link out. I'll be sending the link out for that. So that's a huge invitation to you. And you'll get much better sound then of the actual beehive from the inside. We just couldn't do it. Yeah, we couldn't do it here.
Oh,
okay, so there is a question. Can you see that? I'll read it to those who can't see it. Hello, I do have a question. With urbanization, are we destroying the grids?
No. 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 I do think there's one danger with urbanization, however, which is that everybody wants to be a beekeeper. And I think we're getting to a place where the densities are actually physically harmful to the bees. There's not enough food. So I often see in urban situations, and this is just a really practical question, there's a lot of sugar feeding that goes on rather than nectar and honeys, which is what bees eat.
So even with the destruction of forests in an area or houses going up, the grid is still intact, you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. They still are working at maintaining the grid in whatever areas bees are in. So yes, that's as long as there's bees there, they will be working on their grid. Now that's why when you transport bees just across state lines and stuff, that's out the door. You know, there's nothing happening there. They can't do that then. They don't have their immersion in the local area.
Here's another question. Do you recommend us to grow flowers that attract bees?
Yes, if there was nothing else you did, yes, yes, you do not have to be a beekeeper. And I tell people this all the time now. You don't have to be a beekeeper, but you can certainly supply food, which is one of the primary things they need. Two things, food. And the best food for bees is flowering herbs. So just plant yourself a good big herb garden. Even if you live on the fourth floor of an apartment building, if you have a little roof deck or apartment deck there, you can put container plants up there, and I'll bet you anything they'll come and find it. That's one of the things when the first question that was asked about the urbanization and the bees, it's a shortage of food. So the more food we can actually give them, the better. The second one is prayer. Prayer for bees. Don't worry about bees. They said, do not worry, but you can pray. This prayer is about what you want. Worry is about what you're fearing you're going to lose. So
yeah, and that's actually, that's something that Mary J. Gudden got as a message from Granny the whale. And the whale population is focused on what is the positive, because that will feed it energetically. Don't focus on the negative phenomenon, which is something our society really needs to learn. So there's another question here. Can you tell us about bee colony collapses? Where bees disappear? Are they leaving into another dimension?
Yes, I believe.
Wonky connection here.
And they all leave at the same time. They just spontaneously overnight simply disappear. There are no bees even in the hive. They're just gone. Doesn't matter. And I believe they exited. And not just left their bodies, but they just exited. No one knows where they've gone, and they haven't been able to find them. So that tells you for, what is it now? A number of years, a decade now, we've been having this going on. And how curious that no one's been able to find the dead bees.
So you're saying their bodies, everything just disappears? It's just...
Isn't that the weirdest thing?
It's like, it's just a void?
Yeah, from the scientific researchers, you hear the same thing. They just one day disappeared. We don't know where they went. So, that's still a conundrum for us too.
Very interesting. Okay, now here's another question. Does gratitude help? I think that's in relation to their calling for prayer.
Yes, way more than people realize. Because again, it's the positive use of energy. And it also shows that you're in this grid in a way that recognizes all of the good that is coming from everything, is coming from connection with all of nature. So yeah, that's a wonderful question. And thank you for asking it. So I got to say that.
I'm glad that was asked. Thank you, Charlotte, for asking that. Okay, a question from Hessel. Can the pressure points be seen as ley lines? As I feel bees work within the 13, I don't know what you mean by 13, Hessel. We humans are just learning, the 13 chakras, we humans are just learning the 7 chakras, exceptions there, of course. Can the pressure points be seen as ley lines? Are those the lumens? I'm not sure what your question is actually asking, Hessel. But there is another question from Charlotte. Can we send gratitude to a pot of honey?
You probably could, and that would be, I would fully see that as a valid thing to do. And I'm sure that message comes across. That's very creative.
Yeah, they would feel that. So every time we have any honey in our kitchen and we use it, or even if we don't use it, just send love and gratitude to the honey pot. Hessel, if you want to reword your question, we can try to answer that.
Let me answer something anyway, because I think you're talking about like acupuncture points and within the body. One day I was working at the bee fair in my county, and I was with a guy who was politically exactly my opposite. And we were just having a bit of a go around. And I went to do the bee demonstration. It's inside of a whole big a cage, a mesh cage, so people can see, but there's no danger of them being stung. And after I wasn't exactly having an argument, but we were definitely not having a common agreement about much of anything. And it was my turn to go in and do the bee demonstration. So I went around the back of the building, opened up the door, started to walk in, and I got stung right on the center of the head, right like I've forgotten the name of the acupuncture point that's right there. It's the one where when it's open, the light of heaven comes in you.
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
stung in a heaven spot. And I got stung, which doesn't happen to me very often. And I stepped out of this. It was a double door. I stepped out and I, thanked the little bee for saying, hey, pay attention. And I went, okay. And I opened up the door and I stepped back in. And this second bee came and stung me in the exact same spot. Not
Wow.
anywhere else in my body. 2 stings on the door that opens the gateway to the heavens. And I was like, okay, this is obviously not a time for me to be going in with the bees. And so I finished my shift. I went home. I took off my shoes. I walked up to see my bees, and I was going to go commiserate with them. And I was feeling chided already. And as I was walking, I stepped on a bee barefoot. And that bee stung me, just in defense, stung me right at kidney 1, which is the first acupuncture point that forms when you're a baby inside the womb. It's the one where, again, the entrance of life comes in there. So I got stung on 2 completely opposite points, my topmost point and my bottommost point. And the lesson wasn't lost on me at all. And I've often found, if this was a question, Hessel, that you had about acupuncture points, I've been stung a few times on very precise acupuncture points that had something to do with a healing that I needed. And I had studied acupressure many years ago, and I would look and go, wow, I know what that point is, and I know what it's for, and I needed that. So they're very, very perceptive that way. I think for me, I think all the stings I've gotten have been for a very deliberate reason.
Right, right. Well,
Healing.
you're so connected with them. They know exactly what you need, probably better than you do. So Hessel does have, we have just a few more minutes left. There is another question or point from Hessel. Ley lines are across the planet. Pigeons use them for travel. Electromagnetic force, pressure points feel the same but different name. And then Hessel, you wrote one more thing. Each chakra is a tone and frequency. The 7 make one tone called human. When we open up, we get into Christ consciousness. It feels to me they possess the 13 chakras to the max. I know, Hessel, that English is not your first language, so I appreciate your writing this in English. I wouldn't be able to read if it was in Dutch.
I do know that among other beekeepers, and there are many other beekeepers who are like me, who have a different kind of consciousness around hives. And there's been a good amount of discussion for those who know where ley lines are, that they've noticed that when their hives are placed, along a ley line, that hive really has, it's like it gets a jump start. It's in a place that it's very well aligned with being. And I've even heard people who said they were in a hive and the bees were in a hive and they just weren't doing very well. And when that hive was moved to a place along a ley line, all of a sudden they were thriving. So yeah, they have a consciousness of that, and it probably is very related to the way they lay the grid.
Yeah, yeah. So one last question. Would you comment on Africanized bees versus European honeybees? Is there intermingling of hives?
Yes, there are. And I have a friend who lives down in Los Angeles, and the southern parts of the US and in Central America all have been infiltrated by African bees. I also have friends in Africa who raise Africanized bees. The hybridized bees that we get here seem to be a bit of a different animal, because you have to treat them differently, and yet once you understand how they work, they can be worked with. So my friend who works down in Los Angeles, she is on a list for swarm calls, and of course they just want to kill them all because they're feared and thought dangerous. But she understands how to work with them and has been able to rescue quite a few hives.
Wow.
They're not fuzzy friendly like my hives up here in Washington State are, but I think there are ways to understand them because they have different tasks and different ways of interacting with us.
Yeah.
By that too, I don't mean go out and, step and stand in the middle of a Africanized hive, because you really do have to know what you're doing to do that.
So we need to wrap this up, Jacqueline. We could talk a lot long. And thank you everyone who posed questions. Gillian Guslinger has a point to make about using bees for acupuncture points. So we're going to continue that conversation on the Facebook group. All of you who can join us there. I'm going to open up and once again show you Jacqueline's website. And for those who want to really follow what Jacqueline's doing, please go to her website and sign up as a subscriber. For those of you who are listening and watching this from Europe, she will be in the Netherlands and England and France in this late summer, late August into September. So get on her newsletter list to stay updated. Please get her book. It's hugely important that anyone you know in your life who is a beekeeper or bee lover understand this wisdom that Jacqueline's brought forth. It's so huge. So wrapping it up tonight, I don't want to keep you guys here too much longer. Thank you, Jacqueline. This has been very informative. Once again, we humans think differently than the bees, as we do from the whales and the dolphins and the owls, of course. Next week, we have a remarkable woman named Penny Kelly. She is really a Renaissance woman. She's a writer, teacher, author, publisher, consultant, and naturopathic physician. She also has a very strong connection with the nature spirit realm. She's been working multidimensionally for many years. I'm thrilled she's going to be with us next week, and we're going to focus on communications from the fairies and the nature spirits, which I'm thrilled about. And then again, there's our private Facebook group, which I encourage all of you to access and share and learn and dialogue with each other. I join in there. Hopefully, Jacqueline, you'll have some time next day or so to join us there and answer questions. And one more thing, as of last Thursday, the registration for this webcast series is still up. It was reduced last week. If you know anyone who you think will be really interested, it's at a reduced price now, and they can get all the recordings, access them from day one. Just to put that out there. I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you, Jacqueline, for joining us and your bee community joining us. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Good night to everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Mare.